On the morning of May 14, 2011, in the quiet, sun-drenched Athenian neighborhood of Metz, a woman known to her few neighbors as Lena Papadopoulou began her day as she always did. She carried a small canvas stool and a box of watercolors to the Arditos Hill, positioning herself to capture the morning light as it fell upon the white marble of the Panathenaic Stadium. To any observer, she was an artist of modest talent, a reclusive expatriate who had found a quiet life in the Hellenic capital, her existence defined by the patient application of pigment to paper and the company of 2 stray cats she had adopted. In reality, her name was not Lena. She possessed no genuine passion for painting, and her presence in Athens was the final, critical move in a clandestine war that had been waged in the shadows for nearly a decade. She was a weapon, meticulously crafted and deployed by a consortium of Western intelligence services. And her true purpose was not to capture the light, but to ensnare a ghost who had orchestrated the deaths of hundreds from half a world away. Her watercolors were a prop, her apartment a sophisticated signals intelligence post, and her quiet life was a legend so deeply embedded that she herself sometimes struggled to find the seams between the woman she was and the woman she had become. The strategic problem facing the Joint Task Force, designated Section 8, was a man known only by the code name the Calligrapher. For 11 years, this individual had served as the chief financial architect for a sprawling, decentralized network of extremist cells operating across the Levant, North Africa, and into the European mainland. The Calligrapher was not a fighter or a bomb maker. He was an artist of a different sort, a master of a financial ecosystem that was resilient, opaque, and lethally efficient. He had pioneered a hybrid model that blended ancient Hawala systems of trust-based money transfer with the bleeding edge of cryptographic technology, creating a network that was virtually immune to conventional financial intelligence tracking. Funds, often sourced from legitimate-seeming charities, private donations, and organized crime, would be deposited into the system in one country and could be withdrawn as clean, untraceable cash by an operative in another, with the transaction leaving no discernible electronic footprint. Section 8 could occasionally interdict a courier or freeze a suspicious account, but these were tactical victories that did nothing to wound the network itself. The Calligrapher would simply reroute the funds, cauterize the compromised node, and continue his work, his identity and location remaining a complete mystery. The failure of previous methods was total and systemic. Signals intelligence was useless against a man who communicated through cutouts and encrypted, single-use data packets delivered by hand, and human intelligence assets had been unable to penetrate the core of his network, which was built on layers of familial loyalty and decades-old relationships that were impossible for an outsider to replicate. The stakes were escalating, as intelligence intercepts suggested. The Calligrapher was in the process of securing funding for a series of coordinated mass casualty attacks in several Western European cities, an operation codenamed the Glass Harvest. The need to dismantle his network had shifted from a long-term strategic goal to an urgent existential necessity. The profile of the Calligrapher, painstakingly assembled from fragments of debriefings and the analysis of his abstract methodologies, painted a picture of a man who was both a product of tradition and a visionary of chaos. He was believed to be in his late 50s, likely born in Syria or Lebanon to a family of means, and educated in economics and mathematics at a European university, probably in France or Switzerland during the late 1970s. This Western education was considered the key to his operational duality, allowing him to understand and exploit the vulnerabilities of global financial systems while remaining ideologically and culturally rooted in a world that operated on principles of honor and personal connection that Western analysts struggled to model. He was not a religious fanatic in the conventional sense. His motivations appeared to be more ethno-nationalist and ideological, driven by a deep-seated grievance against Western foreign policy and a desire to restore a perceived historical power balance. His code name, the Calligrapher, was not arbitrary. It was derived from the one personal detail that had ever surfaced. An anecdote from a low-level courier captured in Istanbul who reported that his superior had a passion for antique Islamic manuscripts and calligraphy. This single detail, dismissed by many as trivial, became the central obsession of a small analytical cell within Section 8. They theorized that a man so meticulous, so patient, and so reliant on pre-digital methods of trust would have a psychological need for order, beauty, and history, a need that might manifest as a vulnerability. He was paranoid and lived a life of extreme operational security, never staying in one place for more than a few weeks, using a series of false identities, and never meeting anyone outside of his most trusted inner circle. He was a ghost in the machine, but the analysts hypothesized that even a ghost has an echo, and his echo was a love for the tangible, historical beauty of the written word. The proposal that emerged from this analytical cell, designated Operation Labyrinth, was audacious to the point of seeming fantastical. It was predicated on the high-risk, high-confidence assumption that the calligrapher's personal passion for antique manuscripts was not just a hobby, but a potential avenue of approach. The plan was to pivot away from a direct assault on his financial network and instead construct an elaborate snare within the adjacent and equally opaque world of high-end art and antiquities trafficking. Conventional methods had failed, so the solution had to be unconventional. The core of the idea was to create a honeypot asset, not of a sexual or ideological nature, but of a technical and artistic one. They would create an expert, a specialist so unique and so skilled that the calligrapher's network, which was known to occasionally move valuable items as a way to transfer wealth, would be drawn to her organically. This specialist would offer a service that was nearly impossible to find elsewhere: the ability to embed data within historical artifacts in a way that was physically undetectable without destroying the object itself. The operational concept was to turn the target's own methodology against him. He used physical couriers to move digital information. They would give him a new, seemingly perfect method for doing so, and in the process, they would gain access to the data he was trying to protect. The obstacles were immense. It required finding or creating an operative with an incredibly niche skill set, building a legend for her that could withstand the intense scrutiny of a paranoid criminal network, and deploying her in a city that served as a known crossroads for both licit and illicit trade between Europe and the Middle East. Athens was chosen for its geography, its sprawling, chaotic urban landscape, and its deep-rooted, often corrupt, antiquities market. The risk of failure was catastrophic. If the operative were compromised, it would not only result in her death, but would also alert the calligrapher that he was being targeted through his one known personal interest, causing him to vanish forever. The first component of the preparation was the selection of the operative. The search was not conducted within the ranks of existing intelligence officers. The required skill set, a world-class knowledge of art conservation, specifically paper and pigment chemistry from the Ottoman and Persian periods, combined with the psychological resilience for deep cover operations, did not exist. They had to find a civilian and build an operative from the ground up. After a 6-month search that combed through university art history departments, museum conservation labs, and private restoration studios, they found her. Her name was Helena, a 34-year-old art conservator working at a prestigious museum in London. Her academic focus was on the preservation of Islamic astronomical charts, a field so specialized it had fewer than a dozen true experts worldwide. What made her the perfect candidate, however, was not just her professional expertise, but her personal history. Her parents, both humanitarian doctors, had been killed 7 years prior in a bombing in Beirut, an attack that was later traced back to a cell funded directly by the Calligraphers Network. Helena's grief had since calcified into a quiet, intensely focused determination. She was not seeking revenge in a hot-blooded sense, but rather a form of cosmic rebalancing, a correction to an equation that had left her life irrevocably broken. Psychological profiling indicated that this motivation was stable and would provide the necessary anchor to withstand the immense pressures of the mission. She was detached, methodical, and possessed a formidable memory for detail, qualities that made her an excellent conservator and, the section believed, an ideal deep cover asset. Her recruitment was a delicate process, a series of carefully orchestrated conversations that began with a vague consultancy for the Foreign Office, and slowly, over weeks, peeled back the layers to reveal the true nature of the request. She was told she could refuse at any time, but she never considered it. For her, it was not a choice, but a calling. Helena's training was a brutal, 18-month metamorphosis designed to strip away the academic and rebuild her as an operative. The first 6 months were focused on psychological conditioning and tradecraft fundamentals. She was subjected to grueling mock interrogations designed to test her breaking point, deprived of sleep and forced to maintain her cover story under extreme duress. She learned the arts of surveillance and counter-surveillance, how to detect a tail in the crowded streets of a city, how to place and service a dead drop, how to sanitize a room for listening devices, and how to live with the constant, gnawing paranoia that is the hallmark of clandestine life. Her trainers reported that she absorbed these skills with an unnerving calm, her clinical detachment serving as a powerful shield. The second phase of her training was technical. It was here that her existing skills were weaponized. Working with engineers from Section 8's Technical Services Division, she helped develop the very system she would later offer to the Calligraphers Network. They perfected a method for embedding a flexible, paper-thin microdrive, no larger than a grain of rice, within the dense, layered paper of an antique manuscript. The process involved delicately delaminating the centuries-old paper, a task that required the precision of a surgeon, inserting the drive, and then rebonding the layers using a specially formulated protein-based adhesive that was chemically identical to the original binder. The final step involved using microscopic pigment infusions to perfectly match the natural aging and foxing of the paper, rendering the insertion point invisible even under ultraviolet light or microscopic examination. She also mastered the art of data duplication in a hostile environment. The engineers built her a custom suite of tools disguised as standard conservation equipment. A light box used for examining watermarks contained a hidden induction plate capable of wirelessly cloning the contents of the microdrive in under 90 seconds. A set of brushes had handles that contained high-resolution cameras, and a jar of pigment was, in fact, a burst transmission device for sending encrypted updates to her handler. She trained for hundreds of hours, practicing the delicate operation on priceless museum-donated manuscripts until the entire process, delamination, insertion, cloning, and resealing, could be completed flawlessly in under 15 minutes. The construction of her cover identity, or legend, was as complex and resource-intensive as her training. Lena Papadopoulou was born. Section 8's logistics team built her a life from scratch, a digital and physical ghost that could withstand any level of scrutiny. They created a birth certificate, school records, and a university degree from the Aristotle University of Thessaloniki. They fabricated a modest inheritance from a fictitious grandmother, explaining her ability to live without full-time employment. They backstopped her artistic career by creating a website showcasing her mediocre watercolors, opening social media accounts that were populated with years of mundane posts, and even arranging for a small gallery in the Exarcheia district of Athens to display her work, for which the gallery owner was paid a handsome, undisclosed fee. The masterstroke of her legend was the workshop. Section 8 located and purchased a small, dilapidated ground-floor shop in the Plaka district, the historic heart of Athens. For months, a team of operatives worked to transform it into the perfect front. They did not simply dress a set. They built a reality. They sourced period-appropriate tools from flea markets across Europe, distressed the workbenches to show decades of use, and artificially aged the walls with layers of dust and grime. The space was then wired with the most advanced surveillance technology available. Fiber optic cameras, their lenses the size of a pinhead, were drilled into the ancient stone walls. Microphones, disguised as chips of fallen plaster, were scattered across the ceiling. Pressure plates were installed beneath the floorboards to track movement, and sensors were placed to analyze any electronic device that entered the room. Her apartment in Metz was similarly equipped, creating a complete surveillance bubble around her. The final touch, a suggestion from Helena herself, was the adoption of the 2 stray cats. She explained to her handler that the presence of pets would not only reinforce her cover as a lonely expatriate, but would also provide a plausible, non-threatening reason for her to be seen walking at odd hours or loitering in the neighborhood. Activities that were essential for counter-surveillance and servicing dead drops. The cats, she argued, were the perfect living prop. The technological and tactical preparations represented the pinnacle of Section 8's capabilities. The central piece of technology, the flexible microdrive, was a marvel of miniaturization. Developed specifically for this operation, it was coated in a chemically inert conparaline film to prevent any reaction with the antique paper, and was capable of holding up to 512 gigabytes of data. The cloning system built into the lightbox was the mission's critical component. It used near-field magnetic induction to create a perfect bit-for-bit copy of the drive's contents without any physical connection. This was essential, as the plan called for Helena to receive an encrypted drive from the target's courier, clone it, and then embed the original, unaltered drive into the artifact. The courier would leave with the genuine article, believing the operation was a success, while Section 8 would possess a copy of the encrypted data. The challenge was then to crack the encryption. For this, a dedicated supercomputing cluster was established at a secure facility in the United Kingdom. Analysts theorized that the calligrapher, despite his sophistication, would likely use a key or passphrase that was personally significant. Helena's secondary mission, therefore, was to gather any scrap of atmospheric intelligence during her interaction with the courier. A stray word, a reference, a name, that could be fed to the decryption team as a potential key. The dead drop system for her own communications was equally elaborate. She would leave messages for her handler in the form of specific, pre-arranged marks made with her watercolor pencils on sketches she would discard in public bins. A faint blue line in the sky of a landscape might mean all clear, while a red dot on a rendering of a flower could signal imminent contact or under surveillance. The handler, posing as a German tourist, would retrieve the sketch later. This low-tech method was chosen as it was virtually untraceable and avoided any electronic emissions that could be detected. The entire operational plan was a symphony of interlocking parts, from the quantum-level physics of the data cloning device to the simple, ancient art of leaving a chalk mark, all orchestrated to capture a single man. In September of 2009, nearly 2 years after her recruitment, Helena was inserted into Athens. The first year of Operation Labyrinth was an exercise in profound patience and discipline. She lived the life of Lena Papadopoulou with meticulous consistency. She painted, she fed her cats, she frequented the same local cafes, and she established a quiet, unremarkable presence in her neighborhood. In her workshop, she took on small, legitimate restoration jobs, repairing a torn 19th century map for a local book dealer, restoring the water-damaged pages of a family Bible. These jobs served a dual purpose. They reinforced her cover and allowed her to hone her skills in a real-world environment. The most critical part of this phase was the subtle dissemination of her unique off-menu capabilities. This was done through a carefully selected cutout, an unscrupulous Greek antiquities dealer with known ties to the criminal underworld. The dealer was approached by a Section 8 asset, posing as a wealthy art collector. The asset explained that he needed a document altered and that he had heard of a woman in Plaka who could perform miracles with paper. The dealer, smelling a lucrative opportunity, was given a test piece and a small payment. Helena performed the work flawlessly, embedding a meaningless string of text into a worthless old letter. The dealer was impressed, and as Section 8 had calculated, he began to discreetly advertise her services to his high-value, security-conscious clients. The bait was in the water. For months, nothing happened. Helena lived in a state of suspended tension, every day a perfect replica of the last. The silence stretching her nerves thin. The psychological strain of maintaining the legend, of being constantly watched by her own side and potentially by the enemy, was immense. Her only outlet was her secret communications with her handler, a man she knew only as Simon, with whom she exchanged watercolor sketches and coded pleasantries. He reported that she remained disciplined, her resolve unshaken, her reports clinical and precise. She was a professional, waiting for the bell to ring. The signal came on a Tuesday in November of 2010, 14 months after her arrival in Athens. The antiquities dealer contacted her with an urgent, high-value client. He explained that a representative would visit her workshop the following day to discuss a highly sensitive and extremely lucrative commission. This was it. Helena's final preparations were a model of cold professionalism. She spent the evening sanitizing her workshop, ensuring all surveillance systems were functioning optimally. She reviewed the emergency protocols, the location of a concealed weapon, the escape route through a weak wall into the adjacent building, the duress codes she could transmit to her handler. She laid out her tools on her workbench, each one in its precise place. The disguised cloning and recording devices, interspersed with legitimate brushes and scalpels. That night, she did not sleep. She sat in her darkened apartment, stroking one of the cats, her mind a placid lake of controlled focus. She was no longer Helena the conservator or Lena the artist. She was an instrument awaiting its use. The psychological wall she had built around her original identity was now absolute. The grief for her parents was not an emotional wound, but a source of fuel, a cold, dark star at the center of her being, providing gravitational certainty to her actions. She was ready. The next morning, she walked to her workshop, the crisp autumn air feeling electric on her skin. She unlocked the heavy wooden door and stepped inside. The familiar smell of old paper and chemical fixatives filling her senses. She turned on the light box, its soft, even glow illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. And she waited. At precisely 11 in the morning, a man entered her workshop. He was nondescript, in his 40s, dressed in a simple, well-made suit. He spoke Greek with a slight, Levantine accent. He did not introduce himself. He simply placed a worn leather satchel on her workbench and explained the task. His employer required a small object to be hidden within a specific artifact. He opened the satchel and produced two items. The first was a set of 3 original Ottoman-era astronomical charts, exquisitely rendered on vellum, dating from the late 16th century. The second was a flexible micro-drive, identical in form to the ones she had trained with. The man stated that the drive needed to be embedded in the central chart, and the work had to be completed while he waited. The fee, he mentioned, would be 50,000 euros in cash. This was the moment of climax, a culmination of years of planning. But it was a climax of quiet, intense concentration, not of action. Helena, as Lena, examined the charts with a professional air, commenting on the quality of the vellum and the rarity of the cobalt pigment. She explained that the process was delicate and required absolute concentration. The courier simply nodded, his eyes scanning the room, and took a seat in the corner. The workshop, which had been a stage for over a year, now had its audience. Helena placed the central chart on the light box, the hidden induction plate beneath it now active. Her hands, steady and sure, began the delicate process of delaminating the edge of the vellum. As she worked, she engaged the courier in sparse technical conversation, asking innocuous questions about the artifact's provenance. Her real goal was to trigger the hidden cameras in her brushes, capturing high-resolution images of his face, and to record his voice for analysis. Under the guise of selecting the correct adhesive, she moved to a shelf, activating the cloning sequence. For 87 seconds, a silent, invisible transfer of data took place. The entire encrypted contents of the calligrapher's drive were copied. She then took the original drive, the one the courier had given her, and with surgical precision, sealed it within the vellum. She applied the custom adhesive and used a heated press to reseal the layers. Finally, using pigments mixed with a compound that would mimic centuries of oxidation, she touched up the seam, making her work utterly vanish. The entire procedure took 16 minutes. She handed the chart back to the courier. He examined it closely, holding it to the light, running his thumb over the spot where the drive was hidden. Finding nothing, he grunted in satisfaction, placed the charts back in the satchel, left a thick envelope of cash on the table, and walked out without another word. The immediate aftermath of the courier's departure was a sequence of precise, pre-planned actions. Helena waited a full 5 minutes, a period that felt like a lifetime, before moving. She first walked to the front window, peering through a slit in the blinds to confirm the courier was gone, and she was not under immediate surveillance. Then, she moved to the back of the workshop and triggered the burst transmission. In less than 2 seconds, the cloned data from the microdrive, along with the high-resolution images of the courier and the audio recording of his voice, were beamed to a Section 8 listening post, housed in a diplomatic vehicle several blocks away. An automated reply confirmed receipt. Her part in the acquisition was over. The focus now shifted to the decryption team in the UK. The data on the drive was protected by a formidable layer of AES 256 encryption, but the team now had 2 new variables: the courier's voice print and a clear image of his face. Facial recognition software instantly identified him as a known mid-level operative in a Lebanese smuggling ring, a man with familial ties to a specific village in the Bekaa Valley. This was a significant break. The audio recording provided another clue. At one point, in response to a question from Helena about the chart's depiction of the constellation Cygnus, the courier had muttered a single word in Arabic: Albana. It was an archaic name, not for the constellation, but for a specific star within it, Deneb. On a hunch, the lead cryptanalyst, who had studied the calligrapher's profile, cross-referenced the word. Albana did not just mean the builder or the mason. In certain historical contexts, it was a title for a master architect. The team hypothesized that the calligrapher, a man of profound ego and historical sensibility, might use a key that was both personal and a nod to his own self-perception as the grand architect of his network. They fed the word, along with thousands of variations, into the decryption engine. 36 hours later, they broke the encryption. The key was Albana_1577, a combination of the title and the year the astronomical charts were created. The contents of the drive were a strategic gold mine, the Rosetta Stone for the calligrapher's entire financial empire. It contained not just transaction ledgers, but the very source code for his proprietary crypto Hawala system. There were detailed lists of primary and secondary donors, the locations of cash-out nodes in 24 cities, the identities of his core lieutenants, and, most critically, his travel itineraries and communication protocols for the next 6 months. It was the complete architectural blueprint of his organization. The intelligence windfall triggered a coordinated, global wave of action. Over the next 72 hours, law enforcement and intelligence agencies in 17 different countries conducted a series of synchronized raids. Dozens of key operatives and facilitators were arrested, shell companies were shut down, and hundreds of millions of dollars in assets were frozen. The network, which had operated with impunity for over a decade, was decapitated and dismembered in a single, silent stroke. The planned glass harvest attacks were averted. The cells designated to carry them out rounded up before they could even receive their funding. The calligrapher himself was tracked, through the intelligence on the drive, to a luxury apartment in Dubai. A local security team, acting on a tip from Section 8, moved in to arrest him. He was killed in the attempt, reportedly after firing on the arresting officers. The ghost had finally been exorcised. For Helena, the end of the operation was silent and solitary. The day after the raids began, her handler, Simon, met her in person for the first and only time. They sat on a bench overlooking the Saronic Gulf. He did not congratulate her. He simply informed her that Operation Labyrinth was complete and that the Lena Papadopoulou identity was now compromised beyond repair. She was to be extracted that night. He explained that the network, though shattered, would have survivors, and they would eventually trace the breach back to the unassuming art conservatoire in Athens. Her life was in danger. She would be given a new identity, a new life, in a new country. But she could never return to her old one. She could never again be Helena, the art conservator. The name, the career, the life she had before all this, was now just another burned legend. She asked him if it was worth it. He did not answer directly, but told her that estimates suggested her actions had saved over 1,000 lives. That night, she was driven to a small private airfield outside of Athens. She carried a single bag. She left her apartment, her workshop, and her 2 cats behind. As the plane climbed into the darkness, she looked down at the sprawling lights of the city where she had lived a life that was not her own, to catch a man she had never met, to avenge a crime that had defined her. The mission was a resounding success in the cold calculus of intelligence work. A threat was neutralized, and lives were saved. But for the woman who was once Helena, the equation was more complex. She had sacrificed her identity, her past, and her future for a victory she could never claim, becoming a permanent ghost in a world she had helped to save. The psychological cost of such an operation is never entered into the official ledgers, but it is the price that is always paid. Does the successful neutralization of a threat by such means justify the complete erasure of an individual's identity and life? Is the creation of one ghost a worthy price to pay for the exorcism of another? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you found this story compelling, please give this video a like and subscribe to our channel.